Thank you, Naeem, and thanks to all the panelists. Let me just add a couple of words about public service generally, and then we'll take a few questions, and then we'll move on to the next panel. One of the things about public service is, as was suggested in the panel, you don't have to get A's necessarily to go into public service. It helps to get A's. I got a few along the way, but I got some B's, I got some C's, and I recently confessed to my mom, she didn't realize this, so last year I confessed to her that my freshman fall in college, I got a D in French. But I survived, I got through it, I stayed in school. So as long as you, stay in school, you work hard, you stay out of trouble with the law, you stay away from sort of drugs. Probably tattoos in visible places, probably not going to help your career in law enforcement. But in general, in law enforcement and in public service generally, they're looking for all kinds of people with all kinds of backgrounds and all kinds of interests. So Shabir mentioned sort of the pay and the compensation, and obviously that varies a lot depending on the type of career in law enforcement and public service. And mostly, I was glad to hear that the compensation is beating that in the private sector, and in some places it will, and it does, depending on the type of position. Other places it won't be quite as high as it is in private sector, but there's some compensating benefits to it. Usually in most public service jobs, as Shabir mentioned, the sort of package of benefits of health insurance and pension and so forth is usually quite good, and that is quite helpful over the long term. There are also public service jobs, if you do a good job and enjoy it, they can be quite stable. In the private industry, private world, as you know, there's boom and bust cycles, and things go bad, and people lose their jobs and businesses close. Sometimes that happens, as Naeem was just saying, during the downturn, some of the police departments were constricting, and there were times in our office where we had a hiring freeze on for a while, so we were not hiring people. But we did not have to lay anybody off, and that is, in a lot of public service jobs, they are quite stable over a long period of time, so they can be very good careers from that standpoint. The other thing about most kinds of public service jobs, not as much as a police officer, but in a lot of other public service jobs, many people don't spend their entire career just in public service. A lot of people go to private, or they come back to public. They go back and forth, and particularly in law, that is very common. So I've been in the U.S. Attorney's Office for 20-some years, but I'm an appointee of the president, so eventually I'm going to have to move on to something else, and I'm going to be probably over in the private sector, which is where I started, many, many years ago. So, but it's very common that people come work for U.S. Attorney's Office for 3 years, maybe, go to a law firm or to some other government job or something, and then come back to a U.S. Attorney's Office for a few. That's very, very common. So people's careers, it's not necessarily that you get in one thing and you stay there forever, and that's what you do. And then finally, I just wanted to say one of the great benefits of most public service jobs, and this is something that each of our panelists touched on in a different way, is that your goal is not necessarily to maximize profit or to advance your client's interests, it's to do the right thing. And you get a lot of satisfaction out of that every day in your job, which is very, very important. When I hire new attorneys that come to my office, I sit them down and I say, look, your job, it's not to get the longest sentence. It's not to, prosecute people that, you find unsavory for some reason. It's in each case, it's to do justice. It's to find out the truth and do the right thing. And it sounds easy. It's not easy. Sometimes the information we have to operate on is very imperfect, and you don't know, and different people are saying conflicting things about what the truth is. So that calls for a lot of judgment and a lot of diligence to try to figure out what you think that the truth is in a given situation. And then once you think you have as much information as you're going to get, there's not necessarily one thing that is the right thing, and there may be a range of options that fall into sort of the zone of what's fair and right in this particular case. But that's your objective. It's a hard job, but it has the beauty and the simplicity of being sort of a pure and noble objective. It's just to do the right thing in the individual cases. And that is very, very refreshing, and it keeps people interested in the job and exciting and working on case after case where you get new facts and new situations, trying to figure out what the right thing is to do. So that is a very fulfilling way to spend your days in your career, and it can also be rewarding financially. So why don't I open it up to a few questions? We're going to try to get a little bit back on track, and I know Nick Philippides is here for the next panel, and I think we probably need to take a 5-minute break before we go to the next panel. But we said we would open up for questions, and we do want to do that. So if people have any questions for anybody on the panel. Yeah.
Do you do workshops like these at the high school level and maybe at the freshman level to encourage people to join law enforcement?
And I'll throw it out to the other folks as well. So we have done some. We have not. We should do more of them. One of the things that we have done, and Sean has done quite a few, is invite people into the U.S. Attorney's Office for a morning, usually young people. And we've done it with some Muslim youth. We've done it with people from Southeast Asia. We've done it with people from particular schools. In fact, March 8th, we have some kids coming from Rio Americano High School, and they're coming for an Open Doors program. And as part of that, they're going to visit the courts and talk to some judges and also come to our office. And that's a much shorter session. And what we do is we spend about 3 hours with them, and we take them to see some court proceedings, to talk to a judge, and we have a couple of attorneys talk to them from different backgrounds about different sort of careers in law enforcement and in law. So yeah.
At the county level, they do annually, not to each school, but for general community, they have workshops like this, and they do that every year.
Yeah. And in Sacramento?
I think that's a great question. And for the Sheriff's Department, we do have a recruiting team, and we do go out to a lot of the colleges, a lot of high schools, and talk to kids that are interested in law enforcement, especially if there's a criminal justice class being taught there. We'll go out there and talk to the kids, let them know about what we do, the different type of divisions that we have in the department. And then we also have a thing called Links in Law Enforcement. It's open to the general public. It's hosted by Sacramento Police Department and us, the Sheriff's Department. And we kind of tell people about the jobs. And we'll actually even do ride-alongs, take people on guided tours of the jails and all that kind of stuff too. So they have a better understanding of everything that we do as the Sheriff's Department.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What kind of background do you look for in the attorneys that apply for the U.S. Attorney's Office? And what kind of different jobs do you have?
So we generally, and we're different than, for example, the district attorney's office or the public defender's office, is that, as Nirav was indicating, we are usually looking for people who already have a few years of experience as a lawyer. So there are very, very few spots that we hire straight out of law school. So usually we're looking for people that have, 2 or 3 years at least of experience doing some sort of law. And then in terms of their backgrounds, so we get people from a range of different backgrounds. We hire people from law firms, and that's where I came from. And we tend to find that people who have experience in law firms, it's a great training. It's very disciplining. They learn to read and write well. It is good attention to detail. So we like to hire a lot of people who have some law firm experience. We also hire some people that come from district attorney's offices that have done some work as a prosecutor on the county level and are interested in coming over and handling federal cases. And they tend to have great trial experience because they're in court more often. And so that sort of balances the people who come from the law firms that don't have as much courtroom experience but maybe have more sort of research and writing skills. And then we also take some people from out of judicial clerkships and some people from the military who have experience in what they call the JAG Corps, which are the military lawyers. And so we've had a few people who had a career as military lawyers and then have come over to us, and they're a little bit like district attorneys. They tend to handle a lot of high volume of cases and have some good courtroom experience. So.
One way to get into county government, and I'm talking about San Joaquin, and I'm sure other counties in the public sector has the same thing. They have intern programs. You can enter into that. They have partnership with colleges and
Okay, yes, ma'am.
I want to congratulate the panel. I think it's one thing to be noble, and it's completely another thing to exude nobility. And I'm very honored to be addressing the panel today.
Thank you.
I think Asif brought up an excellent point where he said, do you have any programs for the youth? I think, just to tell you as a layperson, I find a lot of fear in people when the words federal or FBI or state and all these come together. And I've always wondered why that is so, because I think if we want to build a strong community, we have to shed that fear first. And to try to shed the fear is not to try to bring in youth, because this is not the time that they're really able to sit down and grasp the intensity of what it takes to build a career. I think you have to start at the school level, where you really start opening up their minds to start thinking in that direction, so that by the time they're youth, they are well versed in what this is all about, and they really incorporate within them that it is essential to be a part of this element, or at least understand this element in order to build a safe and wonderful society. So perhaps bringing up programs where you introduce one class a week, at least in schools, where you go and start very gently start opening up this dialogue with the children, because fear is not a way to build a community. And I think right now, even an educated person like me seem to have some kind of a foreboding, where as soon as I hear words, it is a bit scary. And I think we need to shed that, because unless we work as a team, and especially with the educated populace, they may be the ones who might actually be observing a whole lot of things, but because they're so overwhelmed with work, may not be able to
Yep.
get back and give you feedback.
Yep.
So I was just wondering, without being labeled an FBI agent, because I keep hearing through the pipeline that so-and-so is an undercover FBI agent and whatever, I'm just wondering, is there a way for educated people who can be a resource to give you feedback
Mhm.
without actually being called an
Mhm.
FBI agent? Because I think
Yep.
that is a deterrent actually, because it's not going to help you collect the information from the community if you make it sound scary.
Yep.
But they might be the most valuable resource
Mhm.
for you to look at it.
Mhm.
I have multiple points I want to discuss. I generally, have a tendency to talk too much, but I do have I've taken down some points while you've been talking. So I don't know how much time I have. I don't want to delay, but they're all very valid points. There are experiences that I have gone through that I think I have had no understanding of who to reach out to and who to tell, but I have picked up a lot of black holes, so to speak, in the system that I would like to convey to somebody. But I think if you came up with a system where you identified educated people or people who could be very resourceful for you,
Yep.
If there was a way that you established friendships with
Yep.
them, collected data from them, because it is really the educated who will help you raise the bar for the community standards.
Mm.
But what I see in the community is that, number one, attorneys have no sort of controls. That is why it has become such a litigious society. Secondly, I think the victim game is played so hard that victims' rights supersede a victim's sense of responsibility. I think nobody focuses on what was the responsibility of a victim, and was there a responsibility, and could they have exercised it or implemented it. But I think the system is set up that they glorify a victim because it sells, and I think the victims understand that. And as a neurologist, I see that a lot of times the person who's playing victim is because there is secondary gain, and then I find out that the actual person who's the victim is perhaps the silent person who has extreme tolerance, or who is overwhelmed with work
Mhm.
and has not been able to respond to the victimization game.
Well, let me address that briefly, and because that's a big debate, which is a big discussion about victims and victim relations. It's a little bit outside the scope of what we're going to talk about today. But let me respond to one of the things you said in terms of interacting with the community. So, and you can ask. We're going to hear from an FBI agent next, and you're sitting next to one, Bob, who can add some more to this. But so the FBI does have something called the Citizens Academy, which I think there's probably probably some people in the room who have been a part of. And the Citizens Academy is exactly that. It's an attempt to reach out to people of all communities in the area, and community leaders and people who are opinion makers and things like that. And it's it's sort of a course that meets, I think, monthly. I think it is weekly during for a several month period, and explore all the different sorts of things that the FBI does, and their undercover activities, their firearms, the gun range. We usually someone from the U.S. Attorney's Office goes over and gives a presentation about our relationship with the FBI. So it talks about all sorts of different things that they do for exactly that reason. And I know a lot of local law enforcement. I know that the DA has a similar Citizens Academy where they meet weekly also, again, with quite a large group of people every year and do trainings. I know the police departments in the region have scout programs for young people, scout posts. So there is a lot of outreach and a lot of engagement. The district that we cover federally, that the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI covers, it's 34 counties, as I mentioned. It takes us 7 hours to drive 70 miles an hour going from one end to the other. So it is huge, and there are thousands of schools in that area. So and there's actually many, one of the great unknown facts out there is there are many fewer FBI agents than people think there are. So there are very few of us federally, whether it's a U.S. Attorney's Office or FBI agents. So our, their ability to devote a lot of time to going into schools is pretty limited. But there are these programs that I would encourage people, whether it's FBI or the county or the sheriff's office or the district attorney's office, there are a lot of opportunities to engage. So let me take one more question. You got a question back there, young man back there, and then we'll take a break and go to the next one. Oh.
I'm unemployed, and is there anything for us, like now, or it's for just for the youth or, volunteer kids getting the job?
Well, I mean, in terms of public service, there's a lot of people at all age for all kinds of jobs. So my wife is a lawyer with the state agency, and the California Fair Political Practices Commission. They are hiring people all the time at all different sorts of places in their career. So yeah.
I work for some law companies, and I used to prepare their litigation paperwork.
Mm-hmm.
I was not attorney,
Mm-hmm.
but I have watched and see a lot of paperwork and the cases go through.
Yeah.
So I have sense of law things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm law-abiding person.
Yeah. Well, there are obviously, especially here in in Sacramento, there's a huge number of state agencies here that have a lot of needs. I know there are probably people here in Salam who have experience with some of those agencies. And typically, the way they work, I think Shabir was mentioning this. You want to get on a list of people eligible for state employment. Usually, there's a civil service test involved, and then they hire from those lists.
One more thing that sometimes you suspect one person is doing something wrong and you guys check it. But is that you guys keep a record and tell the next investigator that what he did investigation before? Because sometimes I feel the person is innocent, mostly in my cases, in my opinion. But the people coming from different states, different departments, they suspect him in different way and try to do their own experiment and leave the scars there. And then the next guy come and he sees something on the body and they search more on it. And then they search more on it. And
Are you talking about people?
Skin, his appearance on the person, and it make him more vulnerable and more suspicious.
But are you talking about criminal investigations or people who are applying for a job?
Non-criminal, whatever it is. But I noticed few things.
Well, I'm not sure exactly what you're describing. I mean, from our perspective, in terms of people who are applying for jobs, we take.
But it's not related to the job thing.
Oh.
I'm telling you, if someone is doing some investigation,
Right.
you guys share in your investigation, the old guy, share with the new guy,
Yeah, so when we conduct investigations federally, and I think this applies for most law enforcement, we start with, is there a crime or a potential crime that's been committed or is being committed? That's what we start with. We don't look at like who out there in the community sounds like they're a bad person that we should investigate. We just don't have the resources for that. It's unconstitutional to do that. We just that's not how we operate. So we start with, is there a crime? And if we think there is, if there's a report of it, let's evaluate the information. Is there something there that supports that or not? And we're usually focused on one particular thing, not what happened 10 years ago or whatever. Let me tell you, there's one young person that wanted, we're going to move on. There was one young person that had a,
What do your undergraduate internship opportunities look like?
yeah, so in our office, very limited, because we're mostly focused on attorneys. So we have law school and internships. But I would suggest district attorney's office and public defender's office. If you're interested in law enforcement, that you look both of those places, because I think they have much more robust programs. Okay.
I suggest to just have a stretch out
Yeah.
at the time.
Yeah.
And if we get outside, it's difficult to bring them in.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
everyone
Just
stretch
take a
out
moment.
and
Okay.
start the second
And
session.
then we'll go with Nick. Okay.
What do you guys like to suggest if anybody has, we